Kathy Feeback. I'm the owner of Main Point Books. We're located in Wayne, Pennsylvania, not too far from Joan. And we're thrilled to be hosting two phenomenal young adult authors tonight. Joan He is here for her book launch of The Ones We're Meant to Find, and we'll be in conversation with Hafsah Faizal, whose newest book is We Free the Stars. This is Joan's sophomore book, the story of a near future when life is harsh outside of Earth's last unpolluted place. Joan was born and raised in Philadelphia, and according to Facebook, went to school with a lot of my son's friends, which does prove that I'm old. She will be in discussion with Hafsah, who's a New York Times bestselling author of We Hunt the Flame and We Free the Stars, and a Forbes 30 Under 30 honoree, although this might be the last year.
No, I am 28.
I just heard you were 30.
No, I was joking.
Your trolling worked. Someone was more gullible than me.
I believe Jen. 28. Oh my gosh, such a baby. Oh. Anyway, very impressive, you guys, that you have written so many books and not made it to 30 yet. Joan and Hafsah will speak. They're going to speak for about 30 minutes, but then they're going to answer your questions. So please feel free to write them in the chat, or we will, if you would prefer, you can unmute yourself at that time, and we'll call on you if you want to raise your hand. If any of you don't have their books, you can order them through mainpointbooks.com or come into the store. We have signed copies of Joan's books. She came in to sign them today, and we can mail them anywhere in the country that you like. And I know you'd rather hear them speak than me, so Joan and Hafsah.
Hello, everyone.
Hi, friends. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you all for coming. I'm excited to be hosting Joan for her amazing new book, The Ones We're Meant to Find, which I just finished reading 2 days ago, I think, and I'm still thinking about it. And I think I'll be thinking about it for a long time because it was amazing. So technically I should have like prepared questions to ask her, but we're both like very, I think, awkward and ready to just ramble on and ask each other random questions. So
yeah, we had a chat. We basically chat every day. We had a chat before this where we're like, what are we going to talk about that isn't overly weird and personal like it usually is? So we're winging it. Please forgive us if it's obvious that we were winging it.
And I feel like it wouldn't really work out if we were doing like super professional and prepared questions. Like, yeah, that wouldn't.
Yeah, I'm resisting calling Hafsah Goat because I refer to Hafsah as Goat. But I'm making a real effort to use her name through this. If a goat slips out, that's why. So.
Okay, so firstly, how's your day that your book is out there?
Yeah, it's been good. It's been awesome and really exciting because I was driving around basically seeing the book in stores. So I stopped by like a number of Barnes and Nobles, which yeah, so the book is like the Barnes and Noble pick for the May Young Adult Book Club. So there's so much stock there, and I signed that, and I signed at a bunch of indies and the places that you guys pre-ordered at, which was so much fun. I did get very car sick because I also slept 4 hours the night before. So I'm trying to not appear car sick right now, but it was great minus the car sickness.
And I don't know if you guys missed it on Twitter, but there's like an exclusive Barnes and Noble edition, which is like super shiny and pearlescent, and it looks beautiful. Isn't there exclusive content inside? No, can't remember.
Yes, there is an annotated chapter where I hand wrote like my thoughts and stuff into the margins and between the lines. And the chapter is chapter 35, which is also the 60% mark for those of you who read on Kindle. If you know the chapter, you know it. It was an obvious one for me to pick.
Okay, so the number one thought I had while reading the book was that this is really smart. Like I love the writing and that it was like really poetic and lyrical and your quotes are amazing. But the number one thought I had was like, this is so smart. How did you think about it? I want to know like from the start, like where the story idea came from, why you decided to tackle like climate change. And I mean, besides obvious reasons, but why the ocean, all of that. Tell me everything.
Thank you. Glad you thought it was smart. When I get asked like, how did you like write the different point of views? How did you keep the timelines in check? My answer is I just tried my best. I was stressed during it, so I'm glad it doesn't show. In terms of how the idea came about, it really was, it started from like this dream I had where I had this image of a girl diving to the bottom of the sea, and she was clearly searching for something or someone. And I was trying to figure out what she was searching for. And I thought back to a lot of the books that I read as a teen, which was right around when like the young adult dystopian boom happened in like the early 2010s. And I absolutely love those books. Those were the books that got me into young adult. And one of the tropes that I realized appeared through a lot of these books is that you would have this really badass, like kick butt main character who would like go on to do these incredible things like win the Hunger Games or save the world or topple governments. Um, and yet the author kept them relatable. And I've noticed that one of the ways that they cued that relatability was often through a younger sibling relationship. Like if you establish early on that this character has a vulnerability, has someone that they care about, that they're going to put their life on the line to protect, that makes them seem automatically more human and relatable in the eyes of the reader. And I thought that was such an interesting like recurrence through these stories. And I personally love twists. I love making the reader assume something depending on the genre, depending on just how the story is set up, and then kind of subverting it on them. So that was the answer to what the girl in my dream was searching for. I was like, what if she's searching for her younger sibling? But that character is so much more than just like a storytelling device or like a tool for developing pathos. Instead, that character is the younger sibling is the character who is driving the plot and really orchestrating a lot of the story's machinations. Once I had that, and obviously since I had that dream of like the ocean, I knew the story would be set like in an ocean or by an ocean. I kind of knew that the world needed to be ending because I needed the characters to be separated. I needed the world to be ending for the twist, which if you've read, you know, I needed that for the twist to work. So then I thought about, okay, like what is probably the most plausible reason the world is ending? Because I didn't really want to spend too much time convincing the reader about like why the world would be ending this way. Like that's why I wrote out things like aliens or like weird, like zombies or like whatever would require me to establish like more world info to make you suspend that disbelief. And I thought the most believable thing was probably just climate change. So that's kind of how like the decision to weave in climate change came about.
That was another thing that just like it was unsettling how real it felt. Like, you know, a lot of dystopia that you read, well, it's been a while since I read one, but it seemed like so far out there, like that it can never happen to us. But then reading the ones we're meant to find, it felt like it was very plausible. I mean, it's happening right now, so it was really unsettling to read in a good way. But aren't you proud of me for like remembering your title? I've referred to this book as like ocean book forever.
You're not the only one. I just had a friend earlier today who was like, I have to conscientiously think about the acronym because they also referred to it as ocean book.
Well,
in
you
group
did
chats.
that, so.
Yeah, I did that. And like with another friend, I referred to it as KC, like by like the initials KC book. Just because yeah, the ones that are undefined is a pretty long title.
It is, but it looks beautiful on the cover. So
it's, by the way, shout out to Macmillan's designer Aurora, who actually did the hand lettering of the title. I just love it so much.
Yeah, it's beautiful, and I'm also, because she did such great work on your cover, I'm just excited for her to work on my new book too, which I heard she's
working on tea. I'm so excited. Hafsah has a book coming out in 2022 called A Tempest of Tea, and we're going to have the same cover designer. I'm so excited to see.
Yeah, I am too. We'll see how that goes. Okay, so now that you've written published a fantasy and published sci-fi dystopia, which do you prefer a genre, or is like, did you like when I'm thinking about writing, I'm just like, I'm now in fantasy. I want to like stick in fantasy for a little while longer because this is where I feel like I've gotten comfortable. What made you like up and leave fantasy and write dystopia science fiction?
Yeah, so the answer is probably not as romantic as people would think. The reality is that it's honestly like a miracle that like every book that gets published has to jump through so many hoops. There's
Mm-hmm.
so many things like timing, market, sales, etc. So after Descendant, I will not speak of the companion books that shall not be named. But after Descendant, I was working on a different Chinese fantasy, and I'd finished that, and I actually was hoping that we might go on submission with that next. But because of like timing and different factors, because I really wanted to break out of the place that I was at, we decided that the best strategy would be to kind of do a pivot and work on something else. Luckily for me, I had written The Ones We're Meant to Find actually right as Descendant was going on submission round 2 to editors.
Mm-hmm.
And I wrote the book probably because I was really tired of Descendant at that point in time. That's like when I was like, I don't care if the book doesn't sell, it's probably not going to sell. I don't want to work on another fantasy. So I wrote The Ones We're Meant to Find in a span of like 2 months. And then I ended up writing like my other Chinese fantasy. But I had this book that was done. I just didn't feel like it was ready to submit at the time. So like that's why I was like, okay, like I want my next follow up to be a Chinese fantasy, just because
Mm-hmm.
The Ones has always felt like an idea that has felt so big, and I know there's so much potential in it, and I felt like maybe I knew something was missing from it. Like after I finished the book, I knew something was wrong and I didn't know how to fix it.
Mm-hmm.
But because again of like deciding to pivot and my agent and I deciding it'd be better to try going on wide submission with something that was vastly different from Descendant, I revisited that story. I just accepted that something was wrong with it. And I let my agent convince me that it was fine, like it was good. And that's how The Ones We're Meant to Find came about, because it went on submission. It sold in a process that was very different from Descendant. And yeah, that's why it's my book too. I mean, I still love I actually love that it's my book too, because like in an alternate universe, I'm pretty sure Descendant might not have sold, just because it really was difficult. Like that submission process, we really only did get one yes. And in that alternate universe, I'm pretty sure this book would have been my debut. So it's kind of funny that it kind of is my debut now,
Yeah.
sort of, in the US. So yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, it is so vastly different that it kind of feels like it's your first book. Like Descendant
Yeah.
feels like an entirely different story, which I mean, I'm not the only one who's waiting for the companion novels, but let's not talk about that. Um, but despite like you having written one fantasy and one sci-fi dystopia, for me, it's like I wanted to stick with fantasy because it's like this is where I'm building my brand and I don't want to leave just yet. Like it will be kind of like Whiplash. But for you, I feel like genre, it's not the genre, but it's the fact that you have these big twists stories. Like Descent of the Crane had a enormous twist in the middle. And then I started reading The Ones We're Meant to Find knowing that there was going to be a twist. So I spent like the first half of the book trying to figure out what the twist is. Like every little line I'd like read twice and I'm like, I know if she put this line in here, it's probably deliberate. There's something, there's a reason behind it. And
Guys,
so
I just have to say, Hafsah, like after she finished the book, guys, like, did she guess the twist? And she guessed the twist. Okay, so Hafsah is smart. She's making it sound like I'm smart, but she got the twist. Probably because you're pouring over those lines like that. But,
probably I knew
yeah.
there'd be a twist. So I was like, I'm just gonna keep figuring. Yeah. But tell me how that happens for you. Like, how do you plot it out, or do you like discover it in the middle? Like, if I have any twists like towards the end of my stories, I usually get to that point and I'm like, oh, I've been foreshadowing this since the beginning. I could do this, and it's like really spontaneous and like spur of the moment. It's rarely that I plan it out, but how is it for you?
I think I'm probably kind of the opposite in that I kind of have to know the twist before I embark on a story idea, just because I have so many ideas, but without knowing the twist, it kind of feels like the tent pole in the middle of a tent is missing, and I really
Mm-hmm.
need to know like what the middle is going to be, like how the premise and the plot is going to turn. at that 50-60% mark before I really start writing. But I have the opposite problem where, like, because I know the twist so much, I don't want readers to guess it. I sometimes like will under foreshadow, just because, like, in my mind, the foreshadowing is so baked into the very premise, right? It's kind of like when I think about the story of like the Titanic, not that it's a story, it's like an actual historical event, but like the way the Titanic premise is, it's you have this unsinkable ship, right? And so the easiest subversion of that would be, well, the unsinkable ship sinks, right? And I feel like you don't necessarily, like, in my head, I'm like, oh, you don't need foreshadowing because it's so obvious that the unsinkable ship, which has been set up as unsinkable, is going to sink. But obviously that's not the case for readers, so that's something that I actually have to work on during revision, which is to like layer in more foreshadowing. Despite this, I know I'm pretty I'm pretty like spare with my giving like obvious clues because I do want the reader to like think a bit and not get it too quickly.
Yeah, like for Tempest, I have this one twist that I because I had to write an outline to submit the book to sell it to Macmillan, and so I had to figure out this twist. And so right now, as I'm trying to write towards that, because I know that this is what's supposed to happen, I'm having a hard time being like subverting that. So I understand what you're saying. So
I am so excited to get to Tempest.
Whenever it
I'm
gets written.
hounding Hafsah every day, by the way, guys, because Hafsah writes at 1 a.m. and I'm awake during that time. So I get to poke her and be like, are you writing?
Well, she sent me this tea that I just got for my birthday today for my 1 a.m. writing sprints. So thank you, Joan. Okay, what is my next question? Okay, so you told me why you jumped from fantasy to dystopia, but which one do you prefer?
It's hard to say because I feel like both the tricky thing and fun thing I feel like with dystopia is that a lot of the world I feel like isn't actually new, right? Like I think the thing about sci-fi is that like once an invention is made, it's kind of hard to like think of something that's like like a more creative version of that, because there is technically like the code of science that keeps it correct, right? Like for example, like if you've read Warcross, like there is kind of only one way that like virtual reality or augmented reality works, right? There are like if you do develop like a brain computer interface, I feel like you've seen like that in Black Mirror, where you have like a nodule that's like placed on the side of your head that allows you to have like a computer in your brain. And so like all these things are kind of done, which makes it easy because I don't feel like I have to explain it to a degree where it's like this is something completely new to a reader. They've never seen it before. And instead the creativity lies in trying to make the way that all these things come together and how they affect the story different from what's come before. Whereas with fantasy, at least because like I write Chinese fantasy, I am very aware of the fact that the world is something a lot of readers might not be familiar with, right? Like if I say a term for like clothing, if I say hanfu, like I'm assuming that readers have no idea really what that looks like, right? So it's a lot of things like that that make the world building feel a lot more difficult when writing fantasy for me. But it's also what makes it fun, because I feel like I'm not actually breaking new ground because this is clearly like all this has been done in like China, but it also feels fresher in that way.
No,
and also
I
like I also like I feel like I don't have to do quite as much research, although I think I actually researched like Descendant, and also like my other Chinese fantasies about the same as the ones, which is to say that I didn't do as much research for the ones as people might assume because it's sci-fi.
Really, I actually thought the opposite too. I thought you'd have to do a lot of research because it's like what's polluting the water, what's all of that, like how the interface works and all of that stuff. But I guess you winged it.
Yeah, so like I feel like a lot of the research kind of just like came about, I guess, organically. Like for like the water thing, I kind of just knew it had to like be for the plot, right? And then after I wrote the first draft, I watched the documentary called Dark Waters, which is actually about how DuPont's like chemical plants, like they had buried these barrels of like their like waste Teflon products like by this farmland, and like the things in the barrels were leaking into the water, and it was like poisoning all the livestock, and it was like causing humans to develop all these strange kinds of cancer. I was like, oh, like, okay, that shows that it is a thing. So that's kind of how like the research process for the ones came about. It really was, what does the story require, and then either seeing that it was plausible and doing some digging to check to see if it was plausible, or just fine tuning and hand waving slightly the things that aren't plausible. I don't actually know if some of like the logistical and material science things check out in the book, but it's also not about that. Yeah.
That's the thing. I feel like the story is more about the sisters than about like all of this tech sci-fi stuff happening out there. And I like that. Like I've gotten kind of weary of science fiction in that it feels like I'm just reading a science book, but in the ones we're meant to find, it's more about this relationship, more about the characters and their humanity, and like all of this, all the heart that humans have and don't have. And I really, really enjoyed that. So I think you did an excellent job, even if you did hand wave it.
Thank you, friend.
And especially like it's like when you're doing research and you want to know what one thing is called and you don't even know what it's called. You have to like go through a gazillion Google searches just to get like 2 lines written, and it takes so much time. So like the fact that you wrote this in 2 months just blows my mind.
Oh, well, I'm here to remind you that while the drafting of it was very fast, the revision process definitely took longer than 2 months. So yeah, that's when all the Googling, like the 2 hours of Google for one perfect line happened, as well as lots of angst. It's just bad feelings all around.
Well, I do feel
Heather can attest to it. Heather knows intimately how much I suffered during the 5 months that I was revising / rewriting.
Well, you survived, so I do feel like it's important for like writers who are trying to get in that to know that the first draft, it can suck, it can be terrible, and that you can, all the magic happens during revisions, and it's hard to remember when you're in the moment. I'm having a hard time remembering that as I'm writing Tempest of Tea as well. So okay, so Casey or C, which one? Who?
I'm gonna cheat and say both, because C was easier to write, as people might have guessed, but like the reason why she was easier to write was because I didn't really feel insecure writing her. I kind of knew the way that her voice was designed that she would be well received by the average reader, because she is kind of like her personality and a lot of the ways that she reacts to situations, like her determination, her just like heart and warmth. Those were a lot of the things I saw in the young adult protagonists that I read growing up. Like I knew she was main character material, for less of a better term. So writing her, I was like, okay, like I'm assuming most people are gonna like root for C, right? Whereas Case, but in reality, the thing is like C is not actually, besides like the fact that she is very emotional, which I also am, she isn't really like me. Like I wouldn't react like C in situations. I certainly am not as like popular or like as socially like well versed as C, right? And then Casey, on the other hand, writing her was a pain in the ass because like just I knew that she was missing a lot of the things that are traditionally likable or relatable, right? And when I say traditionally, I mean it's because these traits have appeared so much in young adult literature that it's almost become like sort of canon. Like when you read about a main character, especially in dystopian like world-ending situation, you kind of expect certain things from your main character to be like the hero that you expect them to be. And Casey's missing a lot of that. But even though she was harder to write and I felt much more insecure writing her, she is closer to who I was as a teen, and that I'm pretty sure if I were in a book, my dialogue with other people would suck. I wouldn't care about certain things, and I probably would just appear like, oh, blah, like the world is ending, like that. Like I think in those respects, Casey is much more like me. Of course, neither of the characters are really me because like I'm nowhere near as logical or smart as Casey, and I wouldn't handle like the pressure nearly
Well,
as
you
well
clearly
as
had to
Casey.
write Casey's point of view, so I think the smart part is something we can debate on. But I definitely related to Casey more as well because for the same reasons. Like if someone was to say something to me, there was one line that I keep forgetting. Where one of the characters says something to Casey and she responds like in the most awkward way possible, and I was like, this is exactly what I would do. So I loved her. I loved her a lot. I love them both actually.
Thank you, thank you. That is the ideal outcome. I hope people love them for different reasons and
Mm-hmm.
appreciate them for what they each bring to the story, which is vastly different things.
Well, going by the chat, I think you have succeeded. And I do like that this book has a lot more romance than Descent of the Crane. I mean, you went from like a little bit of kissing to like tying boys to bed. I mean, come on, Joan, what happened?
Yeah, it's kind of mortifying that like people involved in my publishing life, like my agent, my editor, have like read certain scenes in this book. But I feel like my philosophy is always what the story requires.
Mm-hmm.
And in Descendant, Hasina was very stressed out, much too stressed out to really develop a real relationship with Akira besides like lawyer dude, right? Whereas in this book, even though C is obviously stressed out, I would say she's not as like mentally, she's very physically stressed out, but mentally she's a little bit freer than Hasina. She doesn't have to consider as many things. And so there is more room for
but also
frolicking.
she's been alone all this time, so I feel like she's craving human contact, even
Exactly.
if
Yeah, that's the reason why, if you've read the book, that's the reason why like the scenes, slightly steamier scenes are in it, because C is just, she loves life so much, right? And like for her, romance is a part of what makes a meaningful life. It's not the true for everyone, right? Like that's not necessarily true for Casey, but it's what makes C feel alive.
I do like that you have that between them, where it's like you have all of this, the more heavier romances like in C's chapters, whereas in Casey's you can tell that she's very different, despite them being like sisters and having been them sharing so much. There's just so much different between them, and I love that. Okay. Okay, so now that, well, I know that once you release a book, you're just like, okay, this is done. What's next? So I want to know what's next for you. Like, what are you working on? I probably know, but
yeah, you did.
Everyone
Guys,
wants to know.
Yeah, Hafsah said she didn't prep. I feel like she's clearly
I didn't. I have my phone here. I was like, I should probably write down answers, but I didn't do anything. No prep.
Oh, I just have to say this is going quite well for us not prepping. Much less awkward than expected. As for what's next, well, I just turned in what's hopefully going to be my third book. It's codenamed Mountain Book. So there you go for people who call the ones who are meant to find Ocean Book. This is your Mountain Book. It's a low fantasy, and again, there's a big twist. So that's sent in. It's obviously first drafty. It's not great yet, but fingers crossed. And I do.
She's lying. I've read a few chapters. It's already great. The writing is already amazing.
Well, okay, like the first like 10K I worked on for like months, right? Like that's what you do, right? Like you just keep on going back to the beginning and like revising it ad nauseum. The rest is not as good as promised. And then I'm also hoping one day maybe to return to Chinese fantasy, maybe not Descendant, just because it's just not. I'm not going to say more on that, but I do want to return to Chinese fantasy, like independent Chinese fantasy, independent of Descendant one day, because that is calling to me. It's kind of like where my heart as a kid was. Like before I read young adult, I was watching Shuihu and Shioji, like Journey to the West, like all those classics with my parents, and they just remind me of my childhood.
Well, if you are going to write a series, I can't wait for you to start writing a series with like second book syndrome and all of that. Welcome.
Hafsah's so mean. Why would you wish that upon me? See, I've been in standalones partly for that reason, because I know how hard it is. I know how much suffering goes into it, more so than the average book. So I'm kind of scared. But
Yeah, you've had to like listen to me moan on forever, so you have firsthand experience almost.
yeah. Oh boy.
Okay, now you said, well, I saw in the Goodreads description that the ones we're meant to find has a bit of Studio Ghibli vibes, and so I want to know your favorite one.
Okay, favorite Studio Ghibli is definitely Spirited Away, hands down, because I watched that when I was like, probably like before 8th grade. I watched it for the first time, and I rewatched it, and the ending of that movie, guys, like if you wonder why I like open endings, it's because of that movie. It inspired so much angst within me, like the moment when, I guess I won't spoil it, but if you know, you know, like the way it ends, I was just like, this can't be it. This can't be the canon. And that launched me into writing like a 140,000 word fan fiction where I imagined my own canon, with Chihiro and Haku. And so that's definitely my favorite Spirited Away movie. And I guess like closely behind that, it would be like Princess Mononoke, House Moving Castle, Whisper of the Heart.
Okay.
By the way, do you have a favorite Studio Ghibli movie?
Well, you should know that I haven't seen any Studio Ghibli.
Yeah, guys, Hafsah won't watch anime, even though like I try to tell her like it's really good and like she'll like the art, and she reads webtoons. So I was like, just imagine anime as like an
I haven't
anime
read a
webtoon.
webtoon in forever. Okay, I've just like I think I've
Look,
read
I see
some
people in
of
the
Studio.
chat being like, oh well, someone understands you, but other people are on my side and they're shocked.
Okay, well, one of these days I will. I have seen some of Howl's Moving Castle, and I definitely feel like one of the characters in Tempest, I always envision him as Howl, but that's basically it. One of these days I will watch some, but I just don't have time. I don't even read webtoons anymore, so you can't hold that against me.
One day I'll bully you. One day when we can see, oh, I've never, yeah, one day when we're in person again, I will forcibly make you watch anime.
We'll see.
Okay. So, do you have any more questions, or should we open it up to people's?
I think there are a lot of questions waiting for us, so let's, if you're okay with it, let's open it up to chat.
You guys have been doing a very good job of answering questions as you go along, but we did get one early on that I have to say didn't get covered. It was from Chloe, and she said, how would a pet cat have impacted C and Casey's stories?
Well, man, like in C's storyline, the cat, I feel like we've competed with Yumi. It might have been cuter than Yumi, but it also would have consumed food. And I don't know if cats like eating taro. Like, I'm honestly not sure if the cat would have stayed alive. So yeah, I mean, but Hero, I think Hero would be a cat person. So there definitely would have been like cute moments with Hero and C and the cat. In Casey's storyline, I mean, I think we already kind of know how a cat, what she thought was a cat, impacted the story. So yeah,
She doesn't care.
she doesn't care.
I do love. Oh, she was like one of my favorite. Yeah, she was definitely one of my favorite parts.
I love people who love Casey. I love people who love C too, but I feel like the people who love Casey are like rare gems. So
no, I feel like, I mean, when I'm writing, my characters are on the awkward side when it comes to like personal relationships. And when I read books, I find a lot of these characters and I like connect to them. The ones who aren't so great with human relationships and who are more like centered in their own heads and all of that. But so that I definitely found myself connecting to Casey, even if a STEM prodigy myself.
You are a STEM prodigy. You're much more of a STEM prodigy than I am. So, like, guys, like self-taught code. Hello, like I can't even look at HTML without getting a migraine. So.
No.
So another question that came in that scrolled past now was from Siraj, and it was for both of you, and I love it. It says, if your characters from each of you were besties, what would they do to hang out together?
Ooh, I guess, which characters are we talking about?
It just says characters, so I think it's a free-flowing form.
I mean, I think Hasina would like get along with anyone really. Like I think I mentioned like once I think she and Zafira would be friends.
Mm-hmm. I think they'd work. Yeah.
Yeah. Because I think like
mode.
Yeah, I think like as much as people hate on Hasina from Descendant just for being like incompetent, at least like in comparison to like the weight of responsibilities that are placed on her, she's a nice person, guys. She'd be fun to be around. I mean,
you're the one who hates on her the most, so you're the one who hates on her the most. Everyone else.
True. Like I think Lillian and Yasmin would be good friends.
Ooh, yeah. I mean, if Yasmin wasn't around, then probably Altair. I think they'd work.
Yeah, they're both very flamboyant. As for like the ones characters, again, like I think C is kind of like of like Lillian's cloth. By the way, I pronounce Lillian because it's like easier to explain to people, but like for people who are wondering, it in Chinese it is Li Lian. But I think C is kind of like a Lillian, but like maybe not as perceptive, not quite as shrewd. So I think she would get along with everyone really and Behind the Flame. Like that's kind of the point of her character.
I don't think she'd get along with Nasir, or maybe Nasir wouldn't get along with her. But if we're talking Tempest, I think she and Jin would definitely hit off.
Yes, Jin's my favorite. I'm glad that C and Jin would be a thing. Remove Flick and just have this crossover.
Casey and Arthi would work.
I could see that. Yeah, I think they get a lot of stuff done. Like take no prisoners, like no nonsense. I think Casey would like orchestrate everything that Arthi needs to get done. All of her.
Yeah. I mean, Jin wouldn't like that though, because that's like Jin's part in Arthi's life.
Like,
so
no, but Casey would make an argument as to why. She wouldn't even make an argument. She just like show them why she's the best for the job. Although Casey might not be interested. That's the thing. Casey's apathetic about all of things. So
true.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think Arthur would get like tired of her and be like, okay, if you don't want to do anything, fine, just get out of my way. Or maybe she'd convince her. Who knows?
I don't believe in her. Go on.
All right. I was going to say a question from Abby for Joan.
Yeah.
Have you thought about writing adult fantasy or sci-fi, or do you plan to just stick to YA?
I really want to stick in YA for now. I love reading adult. I actually have been reading more adult since I started publishing, just because I didn't read that much of it before. So when I read it nowadays, it feels a bit more like pleasure reading versus like analyzing things like craft and stuff. But I don't think I have like the insight to write adult. Like I don't know, like I love like the emotional core of young adult. I love how it really, the story is really the focus, and there's not too many like offshoot branches of like philosophical like musings and like thought wanderings, like tangents and such. So for now, I hope young adult, but one day I would. I mean, I love trying new things. So one day maybe adult, but definitely in the far future.
Becca asks, what's the hardest part of revision for you?
Well, we can both answer that, right?
So, totally.
Yeah.
You can go first.
Oh, I can. Okay.
Yeah.
For me, I mean, I hate revising. hope my editor still isn't here, because I love drafting because I love being able to like put down words for the first time. But like when I'm revising, it really feels like I'm just blowing things up and there's like a bunch of rubble around me. And I don't know if the book is ever going to be good again, because even though like my first drafts are not good, I'm able to delude myself into thinking they're not like really, really bad, but I have a hard time doing that in revision. So the hardest thing would really just be believing that the book is getting better and not that the book is just becoming different, right? Like even as late as when the ones around defined arcs were going out into the world, I was just like, did I just make the book like different versus better? But the thing is, I think everyone knows their book really well, so you have to trust in yourself and know that after everything, the book is both different and better.
Yeah, I think that's the hardest part for me too, like remembering to trust in the process. And that was something I struggled with a lot with We Free the Stars. We Hunt the Flame, I was more clueless and like I was just like, okay, I need to get out of this. But with We Free the Stars, I struggled so much more because I didn't trust in the process. I was just comparing like the first draft of We Free the Stars to the finished draft of We Hunt the Flame and trying to be like, why has my writing degraded when it was just the fact that it was a first draft and I haven't gone through like the work and needed to like get it into shape. And so like being able to tear up the whole story and remind yourself that this this is just the process and that it will fashion itself into something beautiful in the end is kind of hard to remember when you're in the moment.
For sure, yeah. I think the writing, it's so hard, right? Because I think I'm like you in that the more I write, the more I feel like the writing has deteriorated somehow.
Mm-hmm.
And I think part of that comes from like the more you write, the more you know, right, about how to convey information, how to build backstory, how to build the world, and it's like all this stuff that you know that makes you more aware of like what you need to do and what might be missing as you're doing it, right? Which yeah, so
That's definitely,
yeah,
it's tough.
it is. It's very
writing
hard.
is writing is hard, and still we just keep doing it.
It's very painful. We're just masochists.
And another question that's related to that then for both of you is, how much outlining do you typically do before you start drafting?
Also, you start this time.
Okay. Well, it depends on the book. For We Hunt the Flame, I didn't outline it at all. I just started writing the story, and I was very slow at writing that story, but I would always discuss the characters with my sisters. And so when I started writing, I had like this fully formed image of the characters in my head, but not the story. With We Feed the Stars, I had to give my editors somewhat of an outline to say like, this is what I'm working on. This is what is going to happen through the story. So that was a bit of an outline. But with my newest one, A Tempest of Tea, I needed to write a full outline because I needed to find a new agent. I had parted ways with my old agent, and so I was trying to find a new one. And so I didn't want to write a whole manuscript for that. And so I wrote a proposal. And for that proposal, I needed the outline. And it was like pulling teeth. And I still feel like I'm suffering a little bit because of it, because I'm trying to like stick to that outline. But at the same time, I want to go be free and not like caged in. That's my problem with outlines, where I feel like it's boxing me in. And I'm kind of on the fence now with that. I was always feeling like it was boxing me in, but now I feel like I need to write like a quick to-do list for what's going to happen in a scene, because I don't know if it's because I'm getting old or my like it's harder for me to like I need to keep my attention on the story, and I have like so many things that are begging for my attention, and so having that like checklist makes it easier. So it's not really an outline, but it's kind of an outline. I need that like in between so that I'm free but also grounded.
Sure. Yeah. I think it definitely varies by story. I used to be like a total pantser, and then Descendant was the book that converted me to being a bit more of a plotter slash outliner, because I think when you, at least for me, like when I'm trying to write books that have like a lot of plot and twists, it goes really badly when I don't have a sense of like what's gonna happen next, right? So I kind of like what I said before, in terms of like my outlining, I need to know the middle of a book, and usually I always know the ending too. The beginning is something that even though I know what happens, like I don't have as clear of a sense, at least in terms like the beats I need to hit in terms like emotions or realizations. Like the beginning is definitely something that I tussle with a lot more than, let's say, like the middle or the ending, right?
Really?
But yeah, like it it varies per book. Like one of the books I wrote, like I really went off the deep end in outlining. Like I would outline chapters down to like the bits of dialogue that needed to be conveyed, and it came naturally for that one. And then for the one I just turned in, Mountain Book, I really just had like the 25% mark, 50% mark, events, like big events that happen outline. And then as for the individual chapters, I didn't really outline like what was going on, right? Because I felt like for that story, it was less plot driven than my other ones and more character driven. And oftentimes I feel like with a character driven book, you want your characters to have space to like breathe without, like you said, feeling like you're just going off like a checklist and like making sure you like do things right.
Yeah. I think that's why I struggle, because my stories are more character driven than plot driven, and so it's tough. And if you guys need like a book that will help you with outlining, if you want to outline and not like heavily outline, for me, Save the Cat, the novel edition of it, has been really helpful. Like it's a short chart where you can just like plot each beat that happens in your story, and it was really cool to me because I didn't plot We Hunt the Flame, but I was able to use it afterwards to be like, oh, I did follow this, even if I didn't know about it. So.
Yeah, I think that's so cool, right? Because I think so much of it, like as much as we say writing like sucks and stuff, and how we're like bad at it, I think so much is intuitive. Like oftentimes you'll do that thing where you read a craft book and you'll be like, I incorporated a lot of these craft things without really like knowing, like the exact things back then.
I think it comes from reading too, like reading so many books that you, I don't know, like inherently know it after. Yeah.
So the next topic, connected, everything's connected, but it's two different questions from Erica that are connected. What kind of resources do you use when you set out to create your own world? Specifically, what do you draw the inspirations from to create the world? And how do you design the maps?
I guess for me, it depends like for fantasy versus sci-fi, right? So like for fantasy, inspiration for the world really just came from like my innate sort of knowledge from watching like C-dramas and like knowing like these Chinese fantasy stories, Chinese historical text. Like world details really came from that. As for the map, my maps come about randomly. I bet Hafsah has a more like intentional answer, but I just draw like a shape, and then I make sure the distances between things work for my story. Like if I know the character needs to travel this amount of time because they need to like go on this emotional arc during the journey, I'll make sure that my things are like appropriately far or close together. And I try to make the shape look like something that isn't in our real world. That's my haphazard process. For the ones, there isn't really a map in that one. There is like an image of like the island and the floating city. Someone told me like later on, they were like, oh my God, like the floating city reminded them of the Sword Art Online Ironclad like game city. And I was like, you know what, you're right. Like subconsciously, that was definitely embedded and became a source of inspiration for me when I was like making that. But other than that, I don't really have like a concrete process. Yeah.
Well, for me, the process varies, but for like We Hunt the Flame, I started writing the story very Eurocentric, and it just wasn't sitting well for me. So when I stopped to like take a break, I'm a very visual person because I'm a designer and all that. I sat down to draw the world's map because I thought like having something visual might help me with the story and like help me crack what's wrong with it. And when I was drawing the map, I realized that it represents the Mediterranean region quite a bit because I had this island where all these characters were coming together to like fight each other. And so that was when I had this light bulb moment to move it into an Arabian setting. But with like A Tempest of Tea, it's set like like a district. The district is called White Roaring. You're probably going to hear more about this book than I've in this chat than I've spoken anywhere else. But it's set in this place called White Roaring, which is a lot like Whitechapel. And so there's a lot of streets, and so I'm having like keep track of like what's on this street, what's on the next street, what's when they cross it this way, what's standing at that end. But world building wise, it depends on what I feel like the story needs. Like I know the atmosphere I want to create, and so I go into that. Like how much do I need to do? Like, do I need to incorporate the clothing, or is it the language, the food? I try to incorporate as many aspects of it so that you have this like immersed feeling to the story, and evoke as many senses as I can. So it's like I build as I go, I layer it on. So it's world building is one of my favorite things, but it doesn't happen like right away.
You definitely accomplish everything that you say you do. Like I think you write some of the most textured worlds where it's not just like well, you flatter me for being smart. So like I just feel like yeah, you do such a great job with like building a world so that you can kind of like even see like the threads and like a piece of clothing without like you actually describing that, right? Because I think that's what comes when you build something that is so intentional and deliberate that the reader can then fill in the gaps on their own.
Thank you.
So Joan, a question for you from Samuel. Is there a book or a movie or an anime that inspired the ones we're meant to find in some way?
So kind of going back to like what I said about inspiration, definitely like the Hunger Games, and like Legend by Marie Lu, and a lot of the early dystopias, they inspired at least the twist in the ones we're meant to find. As for movies, like the Ghibli movies, it was kind of after the fact that I watched Black Mirror, which I know is like a comp for the book. And when I watched it, I was like, this is perfect. So I wouldn't say inspire it, but it's more like it kind of helped me contextualize like what I wanted to bring out from the story more as a revise. Like I really wanted to explore the way that tech brings out both the worst and the best in us, and how tech isn't actually the villain. It's how it enables us to act or not act that is the ultimate villain in the story. So that would be like the post-drafting inspiration. I also love like movies like Inception. Not that I would like comp the ones I went to find to Inception, but I love like sci-fi, like cerebral sci-fi kind of that does focus on like the emotional relationships between characters.
Sai asks, how long does it take you, and I know this will vary by book, but how long does it take you from having an idea to when you start drafting it? And also, what is the work that you're doing, the pre-drafting work? World building, character names, character arcs, like what's all the stuff that's happening in your head before you put anything on the page?
Hafsah?
I guess the biggest thought is, do I really want to start this? Do I really want to dig into this, or should I just like not, because I know how much suffering lies ahead. For Beyond the Flame, well, for me, it used to be that I would think of a first line and I'd think of the story that comes with it. So one of my previous manuscripts, the first line was that I just wanted a line that was like really different. So I was like, what if there's a girl looking at Earth and she's like, what was the line? It's a space opera, but the line was, we search for Earth every day. So I was like, okay, this is the first line. Now let me think of a story to go with it. With Beyond the Flame, it was just an image of a girl hunting for her people and taking care of them in a world where no one else would. And then I wanted someone who was kind of her counterbalance for that, and that became the seer. For A Tempest of Tea, it was like I wanted to write something dapper for the longest time, and I realized that I couldn't write something dapper and Peaky Blinders like without tackling colonialism. And so it's just that one thing leads to another, and then I just find myself like writing it. And it's not that I have this idea, it's more like I have this one question or thought, and that leads to another, and starts building the idea, and that's what becomes the book.
I totally love that you're writing a dapper book. Like, I'm like surprised that you haven't done it sooner. Hafsah has exquisite taste in all aesthetics, guys.
Thank you.
So for me, I think the process has changed, at least like what I need to do pre-drafting. I think before I definitely jumped into drafting with much less hesitation and much less pre-drafting work than I did than I do now. And evidently you can see because I pants Descendant, like I was much more fearless back then. Like Descendant, I was like, I want to write a C drama / young adult fantasy where a girl's dad dies in the beginning, and I kind of just like jumped in from there. I think now I definitely have to do a lot more pre-drafting work. I kind of need to see the world, the character, and the plot all together and how they work together before I start on a book. Particularly for me, it's the world, because I'm not really great. I have to say, like, I'm intuitively not that great with detail work. So if I don't know what like the core principle of the world is, like what the people believe in as they move through their life, I have a really hard time then thinking of like what they eat, what they wear, like how they speak, like all those little details that come later. So I really need to know like the big like rule at the center of the world. And then plot comes a bit easier for me, and characters kind of come with the plot, because I kind of see the plot as like this obstacle course where I want to cast the characters who are going to be most interesting to watch as they navigate through that plot. So I think the thing that I definitely spend the most time thinking about is world. And I noticed actually the person who asked the question mentioned like music that I listen to when I'm like pre-drafting. Like that definitely influences like how I kind of want the world to feel. Um, Unfortunately, because I need all these things pre-drafting, it does mean I have a lot of ideas that are kind of just tabled for now because I'm missing like a big element. Hafsah just rolled her eyes now because she knows like one of these ideas she really wants me to write. It's this like wizard-esque fantasy, but like but with storytelling. But I just don't have a concrete sense of like what the people believe in the world. So that's why I'm just like
The
I'm not
real
writing
reason
it.
is that it's because I want it that she's not doing it.
That's
so.
not true. But I told Hafsah if I ever write that book, I dedicate to her. So
Well, that's the real reason I want the book. You see.
yeah.
So, Joan, I have a question for you, but it's about Hafsah's work. Someone comes to you who's a renowned graphic artist and is going to turn one of Hafsah's novels of your choice in this question into a really great graphic adaptation. What would you say to that artist about the things that she has to include or it will be wrong? Like you get to stand in and say, here's the thing about my friend's world that you have to get on the page. What would those things be?
I think the first thing that comes to mind is the color palette. I think it just has to like match what at least what I have in my brain, which might not be what Hafsah has in her brain, because that's the thing. I think the way Hafsah creates her worlds is that you know that she knows what she envisions, but she also creates it in such a way that you kind of can visualize things on your own too without her describing everything. So the color palette, obviously the clothes. I think since I'm like into art, that's kind of where I started. I want the lighting to be really epic, especially because I think Hafsah's works like deal a lot with like light and dark themes, just characters who kind of like straddle both. And I just think I'm going to be like overly pretentious here, but I want to see that in the artwork. I don't want it to just be like a flat toned, like colored job. Yeah.
So Hafsah.
Well, it's a good thing you'd be in charge because I would be way too picky and it would never get published.
Okay, but I'd be picky too. Like, also, I want the characters to be hot. That's also really important.
Well, I'm glad you have it. I can give it to you safely, peacefully.
That's why sometimes we have to have our friends stand in for us because, you know, we get lost in our own work. Hafsah, my question for you about Joan's work. Whichever book of hers you wanna make this question true for has been turned into a movie. The astounding woman of color director has won an Oscar. She will not be the second by that point. She will be the third or fourth.
Okay.
And she, in her talk, is going to say what about Joan's work inspired her to do the work to make this movie. What would she say?
Ooh, well, I'm hoping she will say that it's the relationship of the story, the relationships in the story. And there are so many relationships in Joan's story, but the ones that I usually love the most, and this happens in Descent of the Crane too, which makes me really wonder if she's actually being truthful when she says that she's an only child. But it's usually the sibling relationships, because they shine so much. And I have 3 siblings, and I understand that. So it's just, they're always so well done. And I know that in Hollywood, we don't exactly cater to the sibling relationships. We mostly go for the romance or something or whatever else. But if they're making a movie, they really need to focus on that relationship in the ones we're meant to find, and in the sibling relationships in Son of the Crane. So whichever one they wanted to go with.
Friend, that means so much to me. I didn't ask how you like the sister relationship after you finished, because I was scared. I was like, Hafsah has 2 sisters. Cannot ask, but that means so much to me. I am an only child. I
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we believe you.
Yeah. I think that's one of the things that is that, like, the things that you don't have in your life, you kind of have like the most fun and creativity in creating, because you're not really restricted by the things you know. So
Possibly. But I mean, I feel like you do it really well. Like, it feels so real and nuanced, and that these relationships aren't perfect, and they can shift so easily, and you did it really well.
thank you.
Sorry.
Kathy and I are watching the clock and realizing that it's after 8, so that we should ask for another, something quick from each of you and close down, so that folks on the East Coast here, fans who are here who need to go break their fast can, and we can also get Hafsah off in plenty of time. So is there last couple things that you guys, I'm so loving your friendship. It's just so wonderful to hear the 2 of you talk together. So is there anything you kind of want to say in closing?
No, I just so much, and I appreciate Joan for letting me be her conversation partner on her launch day. And I appreciate all of you for coming and hyping her up in the chat. And for Main Point Books for hosting us. So thank you all so much.
Guys.
And I guess Joan's okay too.
No, yeah. Echoing Hafsah, I'm so thankful for everyone who's come. I'm really happy that we were normal humans, like, during this. As I truthfully say, guys, we did not prep. We did not have like a list of questions beforehand, and I really had so much fun. It just felt like I was talking to you like on a normal everyday basis, except we gushed a little bit more. We were not as mean to each other. Yeah. Thank you so much, guys. This was a lot of fun. Thank you, guys. Thank you so much for the book birthday wishes.
Thank you both. That was just great. Nice to spend an evening.
It's lovely to host both of you, and happy birthday, Hafsah.
Thank you, and thank you all for the wishes. Yeah, you guys are amazing.